Hello and welcome to a new episode of Other Record Labels. I'm your host, Scott Orr, where we talk about the art and culture of running an independent record label. And today we have another episode in our series on sync licensing, and it's an interview today with Tarik Bradford. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about Tarik. Tarik is a sync agent, and so this is what we talk about a little bit in today's episode. Of course, we talk all about sync licensing, but specifically from a sync agent's role. And so far in this series, we've talked with somebody who works in advertising and music placement and advertising. We've talked to someone who runs a music library and what that means. And today we're going to discover what a sync agent does. Now, this is sort of different from music supervisors, but a sync agent would work with an artist or a group of artists or a record label or a group of record labels and represent, kind of like a real estate agent, represent these specific catalogs. And in most cases, they'll have an exclusive deal with these selection of songs, and they'll represent these songs and they will shop them to their contacts who are music supervisors. It's very difficult these days to connect directly with a music supervisor. And so sometimes you use a sync agent as the go-between, and they take a certain percentage. So that's just a kind of a quick overview of a sync agent. Tarik Bradford is the owner of Dahomey Music Enterprises, and this is his own company as a sync agent. Before that, though, he's worked with EMI as the senior director of film and TV music licensing. He worked for Universal Music and Rhino. We get all into it. Just as a reminder, as we dive into the topic of sync licensing, make sure you download my free guide to sync licensing, and you can get that by going to otherrecordlabels.com/sync. That's spelled SYNC. And you can also hear all of the other episodes in this series on sync licensing at otherrecordlabels.com/sync. And thank you again for taking the time. I'm very honored to speak with you. When we're recording this, right, we're right in the middle of this Kate Bush song blowing up, and all because of a placement in a TV show. And I would imagine times like these put a much deserved spotlight on your profession and creates a bit of awareness to the work that you guys do. Do you feel that?
Yes and no, and not always in the most positive way.
Okay.
It definitely puts a spotlight on more directly on music supervisors, and also just the world of television and film and licensing. And you'll see a lot more conversations, even from people outside of the industry, talking about that, especially people who are fans of, somebody like Kate Bush, especially when it's an iconic artist.
Sure.
And, with stuff like that, when things like this happen, you'll get calls or text from friends, family members who aren't in the music business.
Oh, right. Because it's made the mainstream media.
Yeah, it's made the mainstream media. And they'll always have their great suggestions about, you should do that. Or why don't you do that with this artist? Oh, you know what? You should do it. There's a lot of that always. So it definitely raises the profile. And then she did something that was relatively unprecedented. I don't remember anyone doing this. She openly talked about it and made a post about the actual placement. And that just doesn't generally happen, especially with artists of her stature.
Yeah.
So I think that's definitely brought more of a spotlight on to just the world of licensing and, what syncs can do for a particular song or an artist.
So what's the negative?
The negative is that people tend to, and by people, I mean people in the industry, is what you will have is a lot of artists, managers, especially labels, publishers will say, why wasn't that mine? Why wasn't that my artist? Why wasn't that my song?
Right.
I want something exactly like that. And the reality is many people will tell you, syncs, the vast majority of syncs go relatively unnoticed.
Right.
So this is more of an anomaly. Not that it doesn't happen from time to time, but just the overwhelming, to where it crosses over to where it's talked about in Variety and things outside of just film and TV. It's an anomaly.
Yeah.
But because it is high profile and because the show is high profile, you'll have labels, publishers, artists, managers who will look at it, and instead of asking somebody, either in my position or a music supervisor or just a studio or network, what other kind of opportunities are there for that? They will make a lot of assumptions. And with something like this, you never know unless you're in the room or a part of the project. But if you haven't seen the sync, projects like that are typically written in the script.
Ah, I see.
So it's not necessarily something that somebody in my position is pitching to say, oh, there are some opportunities that come up like that. But when something is so specific and a scene is written around a song, that was written in the script. So there's not much that you can really do in that situation. It's not a usual sync.
Yeah.
It's a very unusual circumstance. And those, I've worked on some of those, and some shows and some projects and some scenes will call for a particular thing. They might say, oh, we are looking for a well-known song, recognizable from a certain era, and we want it to be female or this or that. Or they might come to you directly and say, this is what we have in this script. Can you help us get this cleared?
Right, right.
And then you're going through the process of clearing it. Well, to outside people, it looks like, there was some great creative idea of like, what should be great in Stranger Things? This Kate Bush song at this point in this time. And that usually doesn't happen that way. Not to that specific level.
So do you think, talking about the negatives, do you think that this presents a little bit of a challenge for independent artists? Do you think there's going to be a lot of people who are just very excited about legacy artists and trying to revitalize an old track similar to this?
No, I don't. I honestly don't think, I know people don't want to hear this, I don't think it really is going to have that much effect on the day-to-day for independent artists or for legacy artists, because it is an anomaly.
Yeah.
So as much as what I meant about the negative side is people in my position and supervisors are going to get all this pressure when it's really just an outlier.
Yeah.
Compared to the day-to-day that you do. You might be working on 10 different shows and 40 different scenes, and there might be one scene like this in one show that's a high-profile show. But now the perception is, oh, that's how all shows are, and the opportunity should be there, and my artist should have that. And I have a legacy artist that's just as great as Kate Bush, or is greater, or and it just doesn't typically work like that. Like I worked years ago. I was at Warner Music Group, and I was a part of the film working on the film for Ray.
Okay,
and it was a huge undergoing that was years in the making. In terms of clearing the songs, getting the approvals, working with, at that time, Ray was still alive. So working with Ray and his team and getting certain songs approved, working with the publisher to make sure things were approved and came in over budget. Jamie Foxx was attached to it. So it was years in the making. And then he passed right before the film came out. So the profile of it was huge because he had just passed. And then the timing worked out. Not that you want someone to pass, but just in terms of the profile. So it looked like, wow, this was perfectly done. And it wasn't that. It was years in the making to get Jamie Foxx on board, to get a script done. That was 3-5 years. And then to get all the songs cleared was a couple of years. Wow. And then it just happened to, the timing worked out to where, oh, okay, you have Jamie Foxx, whose star is growing. You have an all-time great, iconic artist who at that time was having health issues. Yeah. And then you had this movie coming out, and then he passes. And then at the same time, people remember he had been sampled heavily by mainstream hip-hop artists. Kanye West had sampled him for Gold Digger.
All right. Yes.
Ludacris had sampled him for Georgia. So he was in the public conscious as an older artist, and then the movie came out. So it was just the stars aligning.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting you say that, because it's easy to look at this Stranger Things and just think, hot show, great song, but it really is this perfect storm as you're describing. Right. And you can't replicate that, because it's really, it's a little bit of luck, really, even though the song is great.
And timing, and that's just the reality of it. And I'm sure Kate, because the other thing that I've noticed is people talking about that outside of the industry, talking about how difficult Kate Bush is to clear, and that hasn't been my experience. I mean, her music has been licensed a lot of different places, and just the fact that people don't know that kind of shows that this particular sync is an anomaly, because there's probably 20, 30 other syncs that you could point to, like, oh, her song was used in this, but it didn't resonate like that. The scene didn't resonate like that, the timing, and it just didn't come together like that. But you could pull up a bunch of different songs that she has licensed over the years, over many years.
Yeah.
This was just the right time and then the right scene, because a lot of times, sometimes the song may be licensed and it's buried deep in the mix and it doesn't stand out as clearly as it did in that particular scene.
That's another great point. And I also think, I wonder if this particular, and we're going to move on from this, but this particular scene with Stranger Things is that it's also exposing this song to a very young demographic who weren't even alive when this track came out. And so if that track were to be placed in a movie that was geared towards people's in their 40s and 50s, they would go, oh, I know that song, and it wouldn't have surprised them. But I think a lot of people are going, what song is this? Is this a modern song?
And that's part of what raises the profile of it, because also that younger generation that may be seeing that is a lot more active on social media than maybe the original audience that may not be on social media as heavy as fans of the show, who are a lot of times tweeting in real time.
That's right.
And then it swell grows. So it is like that perfect storm of the audience, the timing, the show. Because like you said, if it was a film that was set when that song originally came out, that's probably going to target a certain audience.
Right.
And it may not have the same effect, even if the song is used the exact same way.
So I do want to ask you, you said that it may not change anything moving forward, but I'm curious about all of the subsequent streaming revenue that's coming with that song. And I'm wondering if you think there might be any precedent moving forward where studios or agencies may ask for a cut of that, or the opposite, where a legacy artist is saying, here, use my song for next to nothing in hopes for a career bump.
Well, the latter part that you asked about, here, use my song, has already been happening for the past, 20 plus years.
I didn't know that.
That's already, every time something like that, that goes back to what I was saying about the negative part, is because you will have an artist, just pick an artist of the same ilk or the same era, who will be calling their publisher and their label, now that they hear about this, and say, go get me one of these.
Yes.
And then they'll say, I don't care, give it away for free.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
And then, so that's a constant struggle. And then it just doesn't work like that. Like, I don't care how great the artist is, how great the song is. Does it fit for that particular project at that time? And a lot of times artists will want it to be like, okay, they're releasing a best of or greatest hits, or there's some event, they're going on tour. Well, licensing just doesn't time out the way you always want it to.
I see.
Like, there was, to the best of my knowledge, I could be wrong, there wasn't any big Kate Bush thing going on right now.
Yeah, that's a good point. There might be now.
So now it's like retroactive. You're reacting, as opposed to like a label or a publisher or an artist or a manager might say, okay, we want to set this in place. We want this to happen in June of 2022 because we have a best of coming out, and then she's going to be on tour, and it just is really hard for that to happen. So that's already been happening, and it rarely works out. I've had in my past have tons of artists I've dealt with, legacy artists, who would call and complain and say, go get me one of those. And it rarely works out.
Yeah.
And even if you quote unquote, give it away or lower the fee, like there's still a creative aspect to it, no matter who the artist is. And then I'm sorry, what was your first question again? Oh,
well, the opposite. Yeah. Where maybe Netflix would say, hey, listen, we want some of these 5 million streams a day that you're getting from us.
No, absolutely not. No label or publisher is going to cut them in on that. For one, they're going to say that you make enough money on your own.
Yeah.
And I'm sure the artists, if people know anything about the streaming percentages that artists and even labels get from some of the services, there's not that much to share anyway.
That's right.
So a lot of times the numbers look great, but when you actually do the math on it, it's not the same. It doesn't translate 100% to what used to be record sales, where you could identify 1 million records made $100 million for the label. It doesn't translate as easily as that. It's streams, it's downloads, it's what period of time, what country, it's all these other metrics that are measured. So obviously there's a benefit and there's a boost and there's money to be made. But I don't even think, a company like Netflix or a studio or network would even want to be involved in that, because their money is much more direct.
Right.
Than having to figure out the mathematics of streaming services.
I wanted to make these episodes, more evergreen, but I really wanted to ask you about that. So thank you for sharing your expertise on that, something that is trending right now. Let's talk about you. Your LinkedIn is pretty intimidating. You've worked for Rhino and EMI and Universal and Virgin, and pretty much the last 20 years have been in the film and TV licensing world. How did this facet of the industry become your passion?
It was honestly kind of by accident.
Okay.
I was already working in the music industry at Virgin in the 90s. I started interning I knew I wanted to work in music, but I didn't know exactly where I wanted to be. So I just started interning in a bunch of different places, at radio stations, at studios, at labels, publishers, until I could just kind of get in the door. Mm-hmm. And, all I really knew about the music industry was, kind of like, oh, well, Berry Gordy has Motown. How can I become the next Berry Gordy or the next A&R person that signs the next hot new, artist? And that was kind of my goal. And then I in college, I did some radio. And then as I got in the industry, I started working in the urban promotions department at Virgin. Okay. And kind of navigating my way through that. And then the industry consolidated back in the late 90s. They had a day they termed Black Friday, where
I remember that.
A bunch of the labels and publishers consolidated and got bought. And then Virgin got bought by EMI. And my department, everybody got let go. The entire department and company was basically shut down. And so everybody was scrambling around for jobs. And at that time I had been a floater, which basically meant you went from different department and doing whatever people needed you to do. And I was working heavily in urban promotions. And I said, instead of going after promotions, marketing, or A&R, which are kind of like the three areas that everybody is looking for a job in, I need to try to find another area to at least have a job, because at this point there's I'm out of a job. Yeah. So I went on several interviews, and then there was an opening at Warner Music Group for a job that at the time was called A&R licensing. And I knew a little bit about licensing just from soundtracks that Virgin had released. And I did the interview, they explained to it, and it was actually licensing music for compilations. Okay. So there wasn't a lot of really A&R. That was kind of like a smoke signal to get people in. It was really putting together compilations and licensing the songs that third-party people would come out and request. So if you remember, dating myself, some of the compilations you might get at truck stops. Okay. Hair bands of the 80s, sure, or pop bands of the 90s, and those Billboard top hits compilations.
I do remember the end of the early 2000s. It was the kind of at the end of the CD era. Those were the lots of those, disco compilations and everything.
Pump those out, disco, funk, anything that you could possibly imagine, hip hop hits of the 90s. Yeah. Like any of those compilations, you would just license them, even down to like cat songs and Halloween songs.
Right. Sound effects,
and then soundtracks. So that was my introduction into licensing. And so I started doing that. And then I also started doing sample clearance. It was a position that was open that nobody really wanted to do. So I took that on as well, kind of having a background in coming from hip hop and knowing samples and DJ world really well. I started doing not only third-party licensing for compilation, but clearing samples for people who would sample anything in the Warner Music Group catalog. And then during the course of that time, over a few years, I just transitioned over to the film and TV department. We're all on the same floor. We're all licensing, but there was audio licensing, basically for compilations, greeting cards, soundtracks, and things like that. And then there was visual licensing, which was film and TV. So under the same umbrella, but split up between audio and visual. And so around 2006, I just transitioned from audio over to visual. And another part of my job was also label liaison. So working with all the labels that fall under the Warner Music Group catalog to get those songs placed in television at the time. So if it was an artist on Atlantic Records, like at the time, who was popular there, Missy Elliott, Kid Rock, those were some of the artists of that era, POD. And then Warner Brother Records, which is another label, which at the time had Green Day, Linkin Park. Those were, and then Rhino, which was a part of that as well, was all the catalog division. So anything that was basically older than 2 years was considered catalog.
Oh, wow.
So that would include Led Zeppelin, The Doors, Frank Sinatra, Ray Charles. That's how I ended up working on the Ray Charles. It's the legacy artists that are a part of the catalog that belonged to Rhino, which was still Warner Music Group. So it was basically broken down into 3 labels: Warner, Atlantic, and Rhino. And I was in charge of getting music placed for the TV shows.
And was that a good business back then for the labels? Was that good money?
At the time, it's ironic. That was kind of, it was a great business, but it was kind of an underappreciated business.
Yeah.
We were kind of looked at as the redheaded stepchild.
Okay.
Because at that time, the labels were still selling a lot of records. So a sync was just kind of like a cherry on top.
Right.
It was like, oh, that's nice. That's cute. Okay, great. You got a song on a compilation, or you got a song in a TV show. All right, that's cool. That's nice. We just sold 6 million records for Linkin Park. It wasn't looked at the same way as it is today. And I kind of refer to it as the post-Napster world.
Right.
Once the sales started to go down and you started to notice that our department, all we did was make money.
Right. That's right.
Because we didn't need to manufacture CDs.
Yeah.
And we were essentially just licensing the content that the company already controlled. And people would have to come to you and you would license them. And so initially
unaffected by piracy.
Because studios and networks still had to come to the rights owners to license those songs and pay a fee. And so we just kind of like existed as like, all right, kind of extra. And that's how we were looked at. Some of my old coworkers, we always joked that we used to never get invited to any of the cool parties.
Yeah.
We didn't get invited to the Grammys or any of that. We were just kind of like, we were looked at as a service department because it was all about A&R, and it was all about marketing the big songs. And we just provided a service. If somebody wanted to license a song, they would come through our department and we would license it.
Go ahead. Sorry, I just want to interrupt you and ask you, just going back on this history, because you're talking about film and TV and sync not really being as sexy as it is today. And right. I kind of thinking back to the early 2000s, and in my memory, and correct me if I'm wrong, but when we're talking mid to late 90s, the only time I could ever think of your world would be the soundtrack section at the record store. And
sure.
And that was, those were great. But there was something happening in the early 2000s with TV shows when they started to, like teen dramas, when they started to sync indie rock songs like The O.C. or Gilmore Girls, where, and that's when I noticed the shift. Is that what was happening then?
Yeah, that's about the time period when you started to notice the shift. It's right around when Napster is, in full bloom and going on. And then you're starting to see, labels are starting to see, it still hadn't cut in completely, but you're starting to see a decline in typical record sales. You still had the big artists who would still sell their records, but some of the mid-level artists may struggle with that. And then those shows, that's when you started to see shows like you'd mentioned the O.C. And some of the CW shows.
Yes. Yeah.
And some of those, like you said, some of those teen shows that would have, especially they would do a lot with baby bands.
Oh, okay.
And bands that hadn't come out yet. So that was kind of, and Alex Patsavis is a well-known music supervisor, was the supervisor on those shows. And we would work closely with her. She would come and say, hey, what's a great band that you guys are, looking to get out there? Because you can also license them for relatively cheap. They might do, some of them, they would do an on-camera performance.
Yeah, I was going to say, I remember that too. Yeah.
So these are our baby bands that are just looking for opportunities. So it's not going to cost what it would cost to get Linkin Park on a show.
Yeah.
Or to get Missy Elliott. So you would see a lot of those. And it was also an introduction because these are brand new artists and they're still building up their fan base. Well, now we're helping our marketing department and the labels with that. So we would work closely with those kind of supervisors on those shows and get those artists either on the show, get their songs used in some of the key scenes, some of the montage scenes, whether it was a romantic scene or, a breakup scene or, a car accident, and they would use like a good minute of a song. And then people would go, oh, and this is before Shazam or any of that. So we actually started as we started to see those changes and like, oh, okay, where were these sales coming from? Because, last week there was nothing. And now all of a sudden we see 100% increase. What happened? And then it would be like, oh, the song was on this TV show called OC. And then all of a sudden we started getting invited to the marketing department meeting.
Wow.
And they started, asking us about that, and then started writing sync into the marketing plan for each artist, which again was bad and good because not every artist works for sync, no matter what their sound is.
Interesting.
It really just depends. So they would start writing the marketing plan where it used to say radio, TV, back then MTV, print ads, and then all of a sudden you started to see film and TV opportunities. And that, kind of created a situation where then those labels started to bring in their own marketing film and TV people. And they weren't people who were in our department. They were more or less marketing people. And they were like, okay, go get these film and TV opportunities for these, because we're starting to see these changes in the industry, and we're starting to see some effect from our baby bands. Let's see if this can work for some of our other ones. So each of the labels then started hiring people that were specifically marketing people, compared to us, we were always just licensing people. Like, so we were aware of budgets, we were aware of clearances, we dealt with the managers. It wasn't just going, hey, give the song away. It was, we still had a budget to make, and we still needed to maintain that and also try to keep the fees at a certain level for our artists, even if they were baby artists. We didn't want to give it away for free because you're still dealing with major label clients. So we want to make sure that they're getting fair market value for their content.
Right. And can you just inject, where does TV commercials fall into this timeline? Like using a song in a Gap commercial or something?
Around the same time, you started to see commercials always use songs here and there, but you did start to see more. But typically back then in the early 2000s and late 90s, most songs in commercials were well known and recognizable.
Okay.
So you would see, a Madonna song or Chic or Donna Summer. You might hear a song or, a Motown song in a commercial, and it was just kind of like, oh, okay, cool. It was, again, it was looked at more as the cherry on top because these were already iconic songs, iconic artists. So for them to be used in a commercial wasn't, that out of the ordinary. And then a little bit after that, you started to see some brands taking a chance and licensing songs from either unknown artists that were on major labels or even independent artists and different genres, because it used to be you really only saw songs that were well known by the general public.
Yeah.
A top 15, top 20 song that, okay, even if you didn't know it because it was some time before you would know, oh, that's Frank Sinatra or that's somebody else. But then you started to see it change a little bit as, in my opinion, you start to see some of the brands change, and then some of the people within the brands change. As some moved out, and some people came in with some new, fresh ideas.
That's a really great point, that it is brands taking a chance, because what you're talking about, originally, a brand would want to play it safe and be associated with a Sinatra or Aretha Franklin, or just something that is family friendly, you know? But that's very interesting that they would eventually start to take a chance.
So they would just start to take a chance. It was slow. It was definitely slow. They would take a chance with relatively unknown songs, relatively unknown artists, and different genres, because it was also very genre specific. In the early 2000s, you rarely saw hip hop in a commercial.
Right.
And if it was like the super overwhelming pop hip hop of MC Hammer or Young MC.
Yeah.
It was something like that was so pop and mainstream that you didn't even necessarily associate it with what was currently going on in hip hop to the larger hip hop community.
Right.
So you wouldn't necessarily see hear an Ice Cube song in a commercial, or you wouldn't hear Outkast in a commercial, or the artists who for the culture were big, but if you looked at in terms of TV commercials, you would only see You Can't Touch This or Bust a Move, or those songs that were just so big that they were, basically no different than any other pop song.
Yeah, yeah. Oh man, that's so interesting. I haven't thought about this so much. It's so interesting to hear your perspective living in that time. What was the transition then from your time there to starting your own company?
Let's see. I was at Warner for about 8 years, and then I got offered an opportunity to run the department at Universal on the label side as well. And that was to expand beyond, because at Warner, I was just doing television, and I wanted to expand my clients to ads, film, video games, commercials. So I went over to Universal to do that. And, at that time, still to this day, Universal was the biggest record label in the world. So they had everything from the Motown catalog to Def Jam to Interscope. It's everything under that umbrella. So it was the same role to some degree at Universal, but only on a bigger level and with more mediums. So I headed up the department and oversaw everything creatively. And, we were responsible for getting everything from the Verve catalog, a classic jazz catalog, looking for opportunities for that, to our classical catalog, to hip hop, R&B, like everything that fell under that umbrella. So it might be the latest U2 album or song, or it might be a new up and coming artist by the name of Lady Gaga that we're trying to get placed.
That's so interesting.
So then I was there for a couple of years, and then I went over to EMI on the publishing side. I'd never worked on the publishing side. I'd always been on the label side. And EMI had actually just consolidated with Capitol. So they put masters and publishing together. For those who don't know, most companies, at least back then, were separate. Like Warner, when I say Warner, I worked at Warner Music Group on the label side. So there's a record label, Atlantic Records, Warner Brother Records. There's a publishing side for every song. And so I always had been on the record side. And then EMI was my first time going on the publishing side, but I was still dealing with records because they consolidated. They tried to put Capitol and EMI together and have the teams work together. Whereas in the past, they were always separate. You go to the publisher to clear the publishing, and you go to the label to clear the master side.
Okay.
And EMI attempted to put that together. It wasn't very successful. They were really just trying to, in my opinion, get the value up of the company because the company was for sale.
Oh, I see.
So they sold them to different owners. So EMI was sold to Sony, and then Capitol, the master side, which included Virgin, my old company that I started with, to Universal on the label side. And that's when I started my own company in 2012.
So what is it about this field that really activates you, that really has kept you in it for 20 odd years?
It started off as just, for one, just a love of music. And it kind of combines things that I already just have a passion for and love, which number one is music, but then also film and television. Like a lot of people, I'm a big fan of film and TV, and just the marriage of music and film and television was just like a perfect thing that I didn't even necessarily know, like, oh, hey, I want to do that. They were just kind of separate things that I loved, and I didn't even put them together when I thought, oh, I want to work in the music industry. I just wanted to work in the music industry. And then, during my time in college, I had interned at Paramount Pictures. And but I looked at them as completely separate industries until I started working in licensing. It would be no different. Like if you combine a couple of things that you love, like let's say you love music and cooking, and you get a cooking show where you also get to pick music, or you love music and sports. So it was just, things that I love in terms of film, TV, and music that I get to work with on a daily basis. So that's the main thing. And it's just interesting with all the changes in the industry and being able to navigate and be kind of a chameleon and change with the times, still stay true while still staying true to who I am as an individual, but be able to professionally work with a variety of genres and open up my musical palette and have it grow over the past 20, 25 years to include music that maybe I didn't grow up listening to. Like I didn't grow up listening to punk, or I didn't grow up listening to metal. But now I, after, 25 years in this business and licensing songs in every style, I have what I think is a healthy working knowledge of the majority of popular music that's around, whether it's hip hop, punk, electronic. You kind of have to survive in this business. I believe you have to have a good, healthy knowledge of trends and styles and sounds of now and of the past. Like you can't, one of the reasons I feel like I've been able to not only work on my own, but work within a corporate structure is to always be kind of learning and adapting and being open to things that maybe you weren't familiar with growing up.
Well, this leads me to a question I was curious about. What makes a music supervisor unique? Do they have to be unique? Is it a genre that makes them unique? And you're saying maybe that's not the case, but do you have a specific genre or vibe that people come to you for, or do supervisors try to have some sort of calling card?
Well, the supervisors that I deal with, because just to be clear, I'm on the other side, like I'm pitching music to the supervisors.
Right. Okay.
Well, so what's the best way to answer this? I guess, in my opinion, the best music supervisors do have varied taste, but not all supervisors have that. Some do have and I think everybody kind of has like a specific passion that they might, like maybe you are really into electronic music, or maybe you're really into country. But within that, in my opinion, this is just my opinion, you need to have a palette for a variety of genres, because it's not about your personal playlist. It's about being knowledgeable to get the job done. So if you're hired as a supervisor for a job and it is a period piece set in the 60s, you need to be knowledgeable about that era and knowledgeable about the songs. And a lot of what supervisors have to deal with is not only appeasing the studio and the director and the editors, but it's also getting things in at the right budget. So a director might come in and they know nothing about the licensing world, and they will say, all right, we want the Beatles and we want Jimi Hendrix and we want Bob Dylan. And then their music budget is like $40,000. So then the supervisor has to be kind of a politician and make them understand, here is what your budget is. Here is what these songs typically will cost. And then here are songs that might be in the same realm as the songs that you like, similar artists from the same era that give the same vibe, but may not be as expensive or as difficult to clear, because sometimes it may not even be about money. The artist just may not. What do you do if the artist just denies it? You want, hey, you know what? I want to use this Beatles song, but this is the perfect song. Okay, well, they denied it. Now what do you do?
Yeah.
And that's a lot of what the supervisor has to do.
You had said something about this earlier on. Is there certain genres that do better than others, and maybe even for specific applications? Is it a matter of finding that licensing niche for your catalog?
Yeah, for sure. There are, for one, it's broad, and some people will tell you, oh, yeah, you never know what can get licensed. But I always like to be brutally honest. There are absolutely genres that do much better in licensing than other genres. There's some genres that just aren't going to be licensed as frequently. Doesn't mean they never get licensed, but I'm talking about frequency. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I feel I have an advantage of is working at those major labels and being on the and major publishers and being on the side of part of my role was I saw for the 15 years that I worked at labels and publishers, I saw every request that came in. And so you get an idea of what songs are continuously, being requested, what styles, genres are constantly being requested. So it gives you kind of like the metrics that you need to know, like, oh, okay. And those things, change over time. Like the same thing that was licensed a lot in 2001 may not necessarily be the same thing in 2022. There are certain similarities of songs that work in terms of songs that have build to them and songs that have a great general theme or topic. Those type of things are across genre. But then there are other genres that, just don't, do very well. Like, for example, jazz. I love jazz, but jazz is not going to be, licensed in the vast majority of film and TV shows in 2022.
That's a good point. Unless it's background music at a club.
Yeah, it's going to be background music here and there, and it's going to be a specific spot.
That's a great point.
You're not going to watch a bunch of your TV shows or a bunch of films and see jazz in there.
Yeah,
that's just I've been with catalogs and represented everything from the Blue Note catalog, John Coltrane, Miles Davis. We would maybe license, let's say 2007, you might license Miles Davis 5 times a year. And you don't get much bigger than Miles Davis.
Yeah, that's right.
In the jazz world. So that's just an example of and those were very specific. And then even just in terms of the briefs that come in, because the other part is these supervisors and networks and studios are coming to me and sending out briefs and saying, this is what we're looking for this scene, for this project. And here's our slate of TV shows, films, commercials, video games for the year. Here's what we're looking for each scene, for each film, for each TV show. So you're looking at it. And I always equate what I do to being a bartender. You sit back and you see what is the audience, what is the crowd constantly asking for. And if you're at a bar in Chicago, they probably aren't, right outside of Wrigley Field, they probably aren't asking for high-end wine on a regular basis on game night.
Right.
They might be asking for, malt liquor, for beer, whatever.
Yeah.
And that's what you provide. So it doesn't mean that wine or that high-end liquor doesn't have value. It's just what is more likely to get requested on a regular basis. Most people that are going to a sports bar are going to have a beer. And that's just what it is.
So that leads me, I'm very curious then, what % of songs used in film and TV or the tracks that you've been working with lately are from an artist's catalog that was originally intended to be released traditionally as an album track versus songs that were produced and composed specifically to be used in film and TV? I'm kind of curious about this.
Oh, okay. Hard to put a percentage on it, but because it's really almost two different worlds.
Okay.
Like there's songs that are licensed. That's one world.
Yeah.
And then there's songs that are written for a film or written for a TV. So the majority of songs like that you hear, like the Kate Bush example, those are just songs that exist.
Yeah.
But then you have, now are you talking about score for the film?
No, I was getting wind of, and I was speaking with somebody at a music library, but I was getting wind of, and maybe I just misinterpreted this, that nowadays that there are some artists who will write a pop love song, but with the intent that it'll be great on film and TV, more so than this is going to be a good single for my Spotify.
Oh yeah, that's been somewhat of a change in the industry. That can be difficult for some artists because you also don't want the song to sound like it was written for sync.
Right. Yeah.
But there are definitely artists that do that. There's an area of the industry for that. I can't really put a percentage on it because it really just depends from project to project. And I've never worked at a music library. So like what a library might have clients come to them for would be different than what they would come to for me, or when I was in a major label or a major publisher. They're typically coming for songs. And the outliers, when they come and say, can you write a song? Like, I'll just give you an example. Last week, like I get briefs on a daily basis and I'm sending out music every day. So last week I had a supervisor reach out about somebody writing a theme song for a show. And that is the first time that's happened this year. So it's not
common.
But I also don't represent a library. So that's a little bit different. But the opportunities of people reaching out to say, will you write this song for this TV show or for this film are there. But it's those are kind of two different worlds. And it really, really just depends on each project, because that can be a lot more difficult, in my opinion, than just, a song that you already have or that you're sending out to people. Now, that doesn't mean plenty of people are writing songs with sync in mind without going too far. And I work with artists that do that. And it's what I try to do with the artists that I do work with that are creating songs is give them ideas about what works for sync. So I might say, general themes are great for sync, just things that are relatable to anybody.
Yeah.
So I might make a suggestion to an artist. This is one thing that comes up all the time is, do you have any non-romantic love songs? And people always, what's a non-romantic love song? And I tell them it's a song that's about love. That's not about being in love with with a person romantically. And the best example that I give of that is Stevie Wonder, Isn't She Lovely?
Okay.
That's a love song.
Yeah.
But it's a love song to his daughter. It's not romantic. And the more you think about it, just, anybody listening to this, or you just go home and think about how many songs are about love that aren't about romantic love. And the list gets shorter and shorter and shorter. It's hard to find songs that don't instantly that are love songs that don't instantly go into baby, I love you so much, or I want to hold your hand.
Yeah. And is that something that you see requested in pitches?
All the time.
Interesting. Okay.
All the time. Because when you think about it, it's really hard to write a song from that place that isn't, I'm trying to get with her or she's trying to get with
It's easier to go down that road.
It's easier to go down that road. And an example is I had a scene on, I think it was NCIS LA, and they were looking for a song. The scene was a man in his 40s and his nephew, who was supposed to be 12 or 13 years old. They are throwing the football in the park, and the father of the boy, who is the brother of the uncle, was killed. So they're in the park and they're throwing the ball, and they are tossing it back and forth. And the nephew says to his uncle, I really miss him. The uncle takes the ball and says, we used to do this all the time. I miss him too. And they're throwing the ball back and forth. They wanted a song to play to that. Well, that's clearly a song about being together, family, love, and, coming together after a tragedy. And they clearly love each other. But you can't have a song like I Want to Hold Your Hand. It just would be awkward and doesn't fit. So that, and then the scenes that always come up, the first dance at a wedding.
Okay. Yeah.
The father and the daughter. You can't play
that's right.
So those kind of things come up, or just friendship songs that are just like two guys are just, really close friends. One went through something, the other one is consoling him, and you want a song to play to that.
Yeah, that's such a great point.
Yeah, so
And
that's
then
a
you think of those like sorry to those those iconic songs. I'm thinking now as you're talking about this of like "What a Wonderful World," and that can be
yeah,
used in so many. Everybody Loves the Sunshine,
right.
which I think has been used more than anything, and that's just
And
yeah,
that's why those songs get used so much is because
they're about
those are
life.
really hard to find songs like that that are just about feeling good or just about love, but not necessarily romantic love.
Oh,
They
that's
give that
genius.
feeling, that vibe. So,
And you to
you know,
encourage artists to write for that doesn't feel like you're selling out as a songwriter. It doesn't feel like I'm selling out to saying, "Oh, I got to write a song that is going to get me into a movie," because it's actually just a nice prompt for a songwriter. It's just a nice challenge to
yeah,
say, "Hey, it's
and
actually easier to write a love song."
that's how I present it to the artist.
That's awesome.
Is I don't want it to be cheesy. I don't want it to be. I don't want you to write a song that you hate.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
here are some parameters. And it's, I always use Motown as the greatest record label in the history of the world. And I always use that as an example of there's the way that they wrote songs. There's a reason those songs are 50, 60, 70 years old now, and we still constantly hear them just in the public conscious because they were really well written just about life. And in my experience, when you just kind of talk to a songwriter or an artist about just writing songs about life, they get that. Just like, hey, you know what? There's, songs about overcoming struggle. Like, who can't relate to that?
Yeah.
That's really relatable. Now, whatever that means to you, I'm not going to give you all of the words, but can you write a song about overcoming struggle? Can you write a song about pain? And I think most songwriters, look at that as a challenge and go, oh, okay, it's almost like going to songwriters camp.
Yeah.
And as opposed to just thinking about it like, oh, I need to write this sync for this particular thing, because even after that, you still have to go and find those spots. It's just a matter of, now that you've written these songs, let me get these out to people. And just when those opportunities come up, I can send this song and it's like, oh, hey, wow, that's a really great song. And I've had success with songs like that over the years. And then you've also had songs where they wrote a great song and the timing just didn't work out and haven't been able to place it. But the great thing is, once you write that song, that is a song that exists in your catalog. So it's not like one and done, and you're not focused on it just being a single. You're just adding some depth to your catalog.
That is very, very interesting. So then how do you work with artists with your company? Like, what is your place in this whole ecosystem of sync?
So it's a combination of my company, Dahomey Music. We represent artists, labels, and publishers. And let's say on the label and publishing side, like, I have publishing companies and labels that I represent that may not have an in-house team or person to work the catalog. So it's primarily independent labels or independent publishing companies, and they don't have anybody in-house. And it can honestly be difficult for an independent label to have somebody dedicated to sync when you might have a smaller catalog or a specific catalog.
Sure.
Like, one of the catalogs that I represent is primarily an EDM label.
Okay.
EDM can be difficult to place depending on how it sounds. Like, the heavy dance stuff, that's going to be limited opportunities. Not going to see a bunch of heavy dance music in your average projects. They're going to be really specific. So to hire somebody in-house to do that can be a little difficult. So what I've done is create a lane for those companies to have me represent their catalog and work with them to let them understand this is going to be a challenge, but we can grow in sync, because everybody wants, not everybody, but a lot of people want that overnight success. And I always have to explain to them, this is a marathon. We're building up the story of these songs, these artists, and this label, and finding the right opportunities for them. It might not be today or tomorrow. It may be 3 months, it may be 6 months, but the goal is growth. So if you had 0 syncs last year, let's get 20 this year. If you got 20 this year, let's get 30 or 40 next year, and build that up. And then as you're doing that, also be aware of what people are looking for in sync, so that if you want to write songs that work well for sync, I can work with you on that. So that's one part of it. The other part is a couple of the independent artists that I also have a publishing company. So I have some artists that I have signed as writers and artists that I have, I represent the songs that they have. And I also work with them to write songs that do work for Sync.
Okay.
So that's basically my role.
So what would this be called then? I want to speak for a second to our audience of independent labels and people who own independent labels, and what should they be looking for if they want to get into the world of making money in sync licensing? And I know the whole thing seems intimidating, and that's why we're kind of diving into this series,
Right.
especially for my audience who might be smaller indie labels, one-person operations, whom it might feel like they have to create this completely other division in their label. I want to ask you, how does a record label start to build a licensing strategy for their catalog? Is it looking for someone like you? Is it dumping everything into a music library? Is it pitching themselves to supervisors? What advice do you have for small labels?
Good question. It really depends on the label and the sound of the label and what you're trying to build and where you start. So there's not one generic size fits all kind of answer to that. So I'll give like a few different options. One is to look for, a sync agent like myself and say, all right, let's bring this person on to represent the catalog and go out there so then I don't have to worry about that.
Mm-hmm.
You can either deal with somebody that is commission only or somebody that maybe you put on retainer. There's a few different ways to go about that. Okay. So that's one option. And then the other one is to do it yourself I'm assuming we're talking about the label owner.
Yeah.
And that's just, developing those relationships. And I know how difficult it is as a small business owner myself. And, being a one-man army, I know how difficult that can be to do multiple things. Like not only am I pitching music, I'm a publisher, and I register the songs. So trust me, I know how daunting that task is. And then to add film and TV onto it is even more. And this is, for full clarity, this is a full-time job. And
I'm getting that sense. Yeah,
staying in the mix on things is a full-time job. I'm interacting with supervisors, studios, and networks on a daily basis. Like every day. That's what I do. So that's the lion's share of my job. On top of, like I said, being a publisher and registering songs and doing that. So I don't get a lot of sleep. But that's kind of what it calls for, as I'm sure many of your listeners will know, as, being a independent, label. So you can do it on your own, and that can be really difficult because it can be hard to break in. I won't say it's impossible, but it can be very difficult to break in, to get to know the players and the people, the supervisors and the networks and the studios, because a lot of this, a huge part of this is relationships.
Yeah, interesting.
A big part of I'd say the major part of why I was able to leave, a major label, a major publishing company, and start my own is because of the relationships that I had built there for 15 years. Like when I worked at Warner and Universal and EMI, I got to meet everybody. I had the biggest catalogs in the world. So I know Alex Patsavas, or I know Gary Calamar, or all these supervisors for every show. I won't say I know every single person in the industry.
Sure.
But after, 25 years, I pretty much know all the major players. And, most people who've been around for a while will know me, or at least know my name. There are always going to be some people who either I haven't worked with or have just seen my name, or some people who've come up later. But for the most part, especially in film and TV, most people have at least seen my name.
Right. Well, so, I'm getting the sense that it's very difficult to do on a part-time scale, like you're mentioning.
It is. It's really difficult to do it on a part-time scale. What somebody could try to do is, and this is depending on the size, let's say you have a small label with 5 artists. And this goes the same for, I tell this to managers. You have the management company and you have 5 artists. Well, find the shows or films or ad companies that use the kind of music that you represent and target those. So whereas somebody like me, I go wide.
Mm-hmm.
I'm hitting up 600-700 people on a regular basis.
Okay.
But I have a ton of catalog that I represent in every genre and every style, and including some recognizable stuff and stuff that people will come to me for.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm assuming your audience probably doesn't have recognizable catalog.
Yeah, no, not for the most part. And especially anyone who's, like you're saying, getting started, and they could have anyone from 1 artist to 5 artists or 15 artists. But yeah.
So if you have, 1 to 5, up and coming artists, I would suggest targeting some of those shows or films that, you're going to have to do a lot of research. That's again why it's so time consuming. You got to do research, check out a few websites. There's a site called tunefind.com.
Okay.
That really gives a great layout on the songs that are used in shows. It's not 100% comprehensive, but it gives you a good broad idea. So you can look up songs that are in shows, the kind of music that they use, and then you can it'll tell you who the supervisor is sometimes on the show. And obviously you'll know what network it airs on. And then you can try to connect with those people and say, I see that for this show, let's say you have really cool electronic music and you find a show that really uses a lot of electronic music, see if you can find that supervisor or that supervisor's coordinator and put together, a little package for them of music.
Oh,
make sure the music is all the information in the metadata is together, like the rights for the song, the publishing, the master, what you represent, all the songwriter information, the PRO information. Make sure all of that is in the metadata, and then start reaching out to them using. You don't want to send like single songs to anybody's email, so you want to use some type of service, whether it's Box or Disco. Disco is probably popular right now.
Yeah,
and then just start reaching out to them and say, "Oh, I represent catalog X. I noticed on your show you used a lot of artists in this kind of lane, and I think I have an artist that might be worth your while. Here's a brief, bio about the artist. Keep it short and sweet, and here are the songs with the instrumentals. Please let me know if you have any questions." And just be, cordial, be respectful, and don't also take it personal when you don't hear back, because you're probably not going to hear back.
Yeah.
You have to put yourself in their shoes. If you're a music supervisor on Insecure, a good friend of mine who's on the supervisor on that show, you're getting hundreds of emails every day.
Yeah.
From people you know, from people you don't know, from every label, every studio, every label, every publisher, management company that you can think of.
And it's not to say that your music isn't good. It's just they just have so many options.
There's just only so many days only so much time in a day.
Yeah.
There's only so many emails, because you still have a job to do, and they have deadlines to meet.
That's
so
right.
You can't go through every single email. So try not to personalize it. It can be, definitely frustrating, but hopefully you can meet them on kind of a lull and catch them with the right song. Sometimes it might just be one song or 2 songs or a couple of, your best 3 songs from a particular artist. You have artist X, and hey, you know what? I think this artist could really work well on the show. Here are the 3 songs, including the instrumentals. All the information is in there. This maybe describe what it sounds like, oh, this is a cool indie pop song. Sometimes I would suggest, making, I know artists and sometimes labels don't like to do this, but when you're dealing with unknown songs, it can be good to make a comparison to an artist that might be in a similar way. Like, let's say you have a songwriter who is in that Kate Bush lane.
Yeah.
You say, they would fit perfectly a soundtrack or a company in Kate Bush. I always tell artists, who would you tour with?
Right. That's right. Yeah.
Who does it make sense for you to tour
that's
with?
good. That's good.
Are you more of a John Mayer kind of a songwriter artist? Like, okay, well, mention John Mayer or other artists like that you see yourself, opening for. so that you can give the supervisor an idea of what I'm getting into, because that way you give them the chance to say, okay, I don't need that right now, but I'm going to put this, because all supervisors have files. Everybody has files. And if you say, hey, I create romantic singer-songwriter material similar to John Mayer. Okay, I get that. I'm working on a show that is 60s rock. And my other show is 90s pop. And my last show is all hip hop. Okay, I don't have anything that I need for this, but hey, I like the way this was presented. Cool. I'll put this to the side for when I have a project that works like this. And that's part of the research as well, is try to find those shows that we're currently working on that. And that can be really difficult to do. But, through TuneFind and some searching, hopefully you can find some stuff that fits the artist that you are representing, and then just get it to those targets. So don't try to go wide. Don't try to hit, 300 supervisors like I do. Try to find, 5 or 6 and hone in on those and try to target those and really target what they are needing. And you have to look at it as you are providing a service for them. So they have a job to do.
That's right. Yeah.
I need really cool indie rock. Hey, I have, a really cool indie rock band out of Nashville, kind of sound like the Strokes. Check this out. Here you go. Mm-hmm. Here's 2 songs.
Well,
that's it.
I think that artists and labels especially should have no problem using a sound-alike or saying, we sound like this band, or that, especially just because it just, checks up a box for the supervisor in their mind, and they go, you know what, I don't even need to open this email because I know
what it is.
Yeah.
And even if it is, like, you don't want to necessarily say sound alike, but you could just say, I'm always careful with my language, and just kind of say, like, similar to or in the vein of, or like, how you go on Spotify and it says, if you like this, you may also like.
Exactly.
That's saying the same thing. But
That's
it's like, oh, okay, hey, and you recommended songs off of that. And YouTube has that same kind of algorithm.
Right. That's right.
You watch a certain amount of videos. Okay, now all of a sudden you're getting videos by a similar artist. So it's that same kind of theory. Well, so it could be like an actual comparison to other artists, or it can be descriptive, like, oh, this is dark indie pop, or this is, heavy, gritty, deep South hip hop.
And if you put that in the subject line, they might just put that in a folder and come back to it.
You might just slide it over to a folder, like, oh, okay, hey, I don't need that right now.
Yeah.
Or, oh, I'm looking for that. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And then, keep it concise, keep it kind of direct and to the point. Don't make it too long, because, as I always like to say, we in the music industry don't like to read too much. You're getting so many emails. Right. So you kind of keep it direct and to the point, still with respect, and just kind of respecting people's time. And then try and develop those relationships. Maybe target 3 to 5 supervisors and try to build those relationships. Because when you go out with a catalog of 5 artists, that's going to mean that you probably have less than 100 songs.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So for a supervisor, it's going to be difficult for me to come to you if I can go to Sony or Universal or Warner or somebody like me, and I have a need of 10 different songs in 10 different lanes.
Right.
I can get them all from you, or I can come to label X and they have one kind of style, one song, and one artist. Like, okay, I don't have time to just come to that one.
That's
I'm going to go. So you want to try and target those people for what you have. And a lot of labels have identities. They have, like, okay, I'm the cool indie rock label. I'm the cool EDM label. That could be part of your pitch or your sale. Or like, I recently got a thing from a Indian label, and they specialize in indie music. Oh, okay, cool. Like, hey, I don't need that right now, but it's good to be aware and know, like, oh, is this catalog? Like, is this 60s and 70s Indian, or is it current contemporary Indian music? Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
So
that's awesome.
Yeah, that's what I would say. Try and target.
This is huge. Thank you.
Do some research and target. Just pick out a handful of supervisors and shows to target for your label. And then you might have to continue to move on, because that like I said, you're probably not going to get an immediate response. You might, but it's, you can kind of continue.
It's a long game.
Yeah, it's a long game. Follow the show. Like, definitely watch the shows. I used to have a thing where back in the days, I used to make sure I watched 2 episodes of every show.
Okay.
Granted, that's long before streaming services, so I can't do that anymore.
Yeah.
But you want to be, as somebody who's starting out, and if you are targeted in 3 to 5 shows, watch a couple of episodes of the show so that you're aware of it. So
That's
you're
smart.
not pitching things that don't fit. So like, as your question earlier about, are a lot of people going to hit up, about Stranger Things? Well, you're going to have everybody hitting up about Stranger Things, even current artists. And if you watch the show, you know that they use a lot of catalog.
Yeah.
From 20, 30, 40 years ago. So if you are a new artist, does it make sense for you to target that show? If you look up and you see the past 3 to 5 seasons have all been songs from the 70s, 80s, and 90s.
You're only going to frustrate the music supervisor. Yeah.
Maybe you need to focus on a show that is looking for more new music from new artists. And it's not, especially if it's period piece. Like I always say, there's always an exception. So you never say a blanket statement. But in general, period pieces don't use new music.
Yeah.
So don't waste your time or their time sending your music for a film on Martin Luther King set in 1964. Like you said, it's going to frustrate them.
This has been so helpful. And I think everyone's going to, for the next couple of weeks, everyone's going to be putting similar vein to Kate Bush in the subject lines of all their emails.
I'm sure.
But thank you for sharing your wisdom and your experience with our audience. This has been incredibly enlightening and very helpful. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. And best of luck to you. And it's good speaking to you.
Thank you all for listening, and thanks to Tarik for being on the show. If you want to find out about his company, go to dahomeymusic.com. That's DAHOMEY music.com. And you can also check them out on Instagram. And if you haven't already, make sure you download my free guide to sync licensing by going to otherrecordlabels.com/sync, where we have a whole litany of resources on this topic of sync licensing, plus all of our previous interviews and episodes in this series. otherrecordlabels.com/sync.